May I start with you, Ms. Carlsen, since you are in Mexico City. How well do you think people there is looking forward to this specific talk? How much problems will this solve?
Well, people in Mexico are almost universally outraged at the declarations and now the policies of the Trump administration. So there's a great deal of outrage as well at the visits of Tillerson and Kelly to Mexico now. There's very little hope that their visit will be able to assuage the tensions that exist between the two countries. And the feeling of Mexicans is exacerbated by the fact that they do not feel that their government of Enrique Peña Nieto is standing up to the Trump administration. Then we have the fact that just 2 days before the visit, these guidelines were issued by Homeland Security that were outlined before that actually talk about putting into effect the machinery for mass deportation, that it could affect many, many millions of Mexicans living in the United States, and even sending Central Americans back to Mexico, which is just an absolutely bizarre proposal. So the feelings here, there's going to be protests, there's going to be outrage, and there's really very little hope that this will improve the relationship, which is so damaged at present.
That's true. Mr. Farnsworth, in fact, 6 million undocumented immigrants coming from Mexico in the United States right now. And meanwhile, there have been a lot of resentment, as Ms. Carlsen put it, against the recent directives related to the immigration issue. Mr. Farnsworth, do you think Homeland Security Secretary Mr. Kelly, even though he has very close ties with South American countries when he was working as the Marine Corps general, would he be able to solve this problem?
Well, I think it's a very difficult problem. It's very multifaceted, and from my perspective, anything that complicates the bilateral relationship between the United States and Mexico is unfortunate. I mean, clearly the United States needs migrants for our economic issues and for family issues, and we're a welcoming country. We have been in the past. So this is something that is a shift, perhaps, but nonetheless, it is a different political moment in the United States, and the Secretary of Homeland Security has been given a job by the President. Whether or not he will be able to solve it on his own, I think, is probably unrealistic in this current environment. So it means that the trip to Mexico City that's currently happening is probably going to be a lot more difficult than it otherwise might have been.
Well, Mexican side have already said very clearly, Ms. Magowan, before the trip, that it is not going to accept any unilateral proposal or decision made by the other party, namely this time the United States. If we take a look at the makeup of the immigrants now in the United States coming from different countries, we would probably understand better about exactly what he meant. Take a look at this. Statistics coming from the Pew Research Center, the number of illegal immigrants in some major cities from east to the west coast of the United States. As you see, the numbers and the cities over there. So, Ms. Magowan, the question is, when the president has decided this has to be a big issue, well, the counterpart, Mexican government, does not want to move on it because there has been so much resentment. And by the way, Mexico contributing to the labor force in the United States in a great way. So what can the two secretaries do? If nothing can be reached at this time, wouldn't things become even worse when they go back home?
I don't think so. In spite of the tension, I think there is a lot of hope. And we think with civility, both sides can reach some kind of agreement, at least initial agreements. It is very important to point out, and something nobody's talking about, the responsibility of the Mexican government with their own people. Mexico's a beautiful country. Everybody knows that. It has resources. It has ocean in both sides. It has a great population. Why is it that they cannot absorb and they cannot support their own people? President after president in Mexico doesn't answer this fundamental question, why they are not taking care of their own people. And also talking about the Central Americans, because not everybody is coming from Mexico. They are coming from Central America through Mexico. Again, what is Mexico's responsibility with these immigrants? They let them come through easily as long as they tell them we are going to the U.S. and we are not staying in Mexico. I don't think that's right.
All right, a lot of accusations against the Mexican government. Mr. Carlsen, you want to respond to that since you are based there?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point, but the question is not who to blame. It's not whether it's Mexico's fault for immigrants leaving there or the United States' fault for the labor flows and the demand for labor there. The question is, how do we resolve the problem of what's happening to these people? These people, as was mentioned before in the report, they're not leaving Mexico because they want to. They're leaving Mexico because they have to. And this whole punitive approach of just deporting people back to a situation where there aren't enough jobs to take care of them, where they don't have options, is absolutely wrong-headed. What the United States has to do is start looking at the root causes, start looking at what's wrong with its immigration policies and its labor flows, that this contradiction keeps getting worse and worse. But instead we have this situation where the United States government now under Trump is vilifying the migrants that are the victims of these completely contradictory policies that exist in both countries and criminalizing them at the border and in the United States, and then creating this, shifting this burden back onto Mexico in a situation in which it really cannot deal with it.
Mr. Farnsworth, I think there is an issue here. We heard from the U.S. President Trump, America First, that has been his political slogan from day one, inauguration. And yet, how to make sure it would happen? Does it mean that you would just do whatever you want to do, no matter whether what you want to do can be implemented or not? And usually what U.S. has to do it with all the others. And will the others work with you? Probably that is an interesting question. So the ultimate question, Mr. Farnsworth, is your purpose, your goal, and the way of reaching there. Mr. Farnsworth.
Well, I think that's exactly right. You know, this is an issue. It does affect people personally and in their daily lives and in local communities, so it's a very human issue, and therefore it's very, very difficult. And it's not an issue that the United States can solve on our own. Yes, we can take certain actions, but the truth of the matter is, to address the issue of migrants coming through from Central America through Mexico, by definition, we need the cooperation of Mexico. And from my perspective, it seems as if both countries can do a better job, frankly, of building a more cooperative relationship to address an issue that affects both of us. Right. You know, there are ways to do this, and there are other ways to do it.
Well, one of the things
that we
one of the things that's really standing out is $12 billion US, the so-called wall of President Trump proposed between the two countries on its border. Who's going to pay for that? With nationalism riding so high in Mexico as a result, rhetoric coming from President Trump, can Mexico government afford to even pay a chunk of it?
Well, I don't think Mexico has any intention of paying for it, whether they can afford it or not. You know, this is a sovereign decision of the United States. If we want to spend U.S. taxpayer dollars to build a wall on our side of the border, I think Mexico has actually said, go ahead and do that. It's not something that they would support, but they can't stop the United States from doing that. I think a different question is this the best way to use those resources, which frankly are not unlimited even in the United States, and would that have the intended effect of frankly sealing the southern border in a way that that is commonly suggested? I have my doubts about that. I mean, parts of the border already have walls on them, physical walls and virtual walls, and it has slowed migration from some sectors, but it hasn't ended it. So this is an issue, I think, that's that's going to have to play out in the months and even years ahead.
Right, Ms. Carlsen, you want to respond to that? The wall, who's going to pay for it?
Well, that's been the most offensive proposal of Trump's campaign and now his presidency here in Mexico. Mexico is absolutely indignant about the idea that this wall, which is an affront to them, because what it does is it symbolizes an image in which Mexico and Mexicans are some type of a contagion to the United States. And that has not been the characteristic of the relationship up till now. So the idea of building a wall with an allied country and then even suggesting that Mexico pay for it has really been kind of a flashpoint in the anti-Trump sentiment here. What people are saying is the president should have been stronger to say not only we will not pay for the wall, but that this wall is a step backwards, a huge step backwards for binational relations. It won't work. Almost everyone knows it won't work. It will cost at least $20 billion and probably way more when you get maintenance and the surrounding. And there's a number of things that the United States could do with that kind of money that would go much farther to resolving some of the problems that they're purporting to resolve with the wall.
Whether it's immigrants or the wall or something else, actually they are just sporadic cases with which we could look at the overall picture of the relations between U.S. and Mexico. Ms. Magowan, the border issue, the NAFTA issue, and the early accusation coming from candidate Trump accusing the Mexican immigrants to the United States as rapists and also criminal. Some say these just evade all the trust and the confidence the two countries have with one another. And that is the biggest collateral damage. What do you say?
Well, he didn't say that all the Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers. Now, you have to, listen again the tape, and that's not what he said. He said that many of our drugs and rapists come through that border. And the truth is, it is the case. You don't have, for example, with the other border with Canada, you don't have the cartel of Ottawa, the cartel of Quebec, the cartel of Toronto, because there are no such cartels. But you have all of those drug cartels with Mexico. Again, I think the president and the government of Mexico should take care of that and should be on top of that, because that's in their territory and it's on their own behalf not to have this drug dealing. It's not only the United States. But looking at NAFTA, NAFTA could be one of the ways that trying to understand what President Trump said in this regards of who is going to pay for the wall, could be one of the indirect ways that Mexico will pay for this wall. Why am I saying that? Most of the exports, I think around 80% of the exports from Mexico go to the United States. And after NAFTA, we have seen a transfer of jobs and a transfer of money that really benefited Mexico, not the United States, when you go to the net gains, to the size of $55 to $60 billion per year. So if you have a wall that is going to cost around $20 billion and you can reduce that deficit that we are having in the balance of export-imports with Mexico, there you have some way of having Mexico paying indirectly for the building of the wall. That's just one of the ways.
That's one of the ways. Ms. Carlsen keep on waving her head while you were saying that, Ms. Magowan. So I would like Ms. Carlsen to wave in here.
That argument that Mexico has won at NAFTA and that Mexican criminals are going up into the United States and threatening U.S. national security and public security does not stand up to facts. Mexico does have a $60 billion surplus. There's a lot of countries, including Germany and others, who have a trade surplus with the United States. The United States has a deficit with them. This means that U.S. consumers like to buy Mexican products. Try cutting off the avocados or even the cars that come out of Mexico, and see how that goes down with the U.S. public in these kinds of policies that Trump's talking about. Besides that, when you look at the deficit itself, 40% of the inputs, when you look at the auto industry, these are industries that are vertically integrated. That means that it's U.S. companies that are producing in Mexico, and they're being able to compete more on the international market by doing so. These are integrated economies. This is not one nation competing against another. The whole purpose of putting together NAFTA was to create a North American bloc. And then the other part of it, the idea that drug cartels are coming up, there's no evidence of terrorist threats coming over the southern border. Even John Kelly has admitted that. And Mexican undocumented workers are not homicidal maniacs the way that the Trump administration has portrayed. This is just statistically not true.
Okay, we're going to have further debate about all of these points, but I really need to go to you as well, Mr. Farnsworth. NAFTA, this is a big deal, right? I mean, this has been with the region for more than 25 years. Also, Canada is involved. Previously, before this trip made by the two secretaries of the U.S. To Mexico, Canada said this. They said, we are not going to throw Mexico under the bus only because we want to have a deal with the United States. This seems to be a very interesting picture we're seeing here. Mr. Farnsworth, shine some light for us about how would that negotiation approach from where we are today?
Well, the North America Free Trade Agreement has been a success. It's done what it was designed to do. It increased trade and investment among all three parties, which you accurately include Canada as well, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But NAFTA, when it was implemented in 1994, it was cutting edge at the time. But clearly the global economy has changed significantly since then. I mean, think about how the economy has changed. There was no social media in 1994. The technology has advanced significantly in terms of the kind of car you might have been driving then versus the type of car you're driving now. And NAFTA really didn't capture some of those innovations. And I think there is a case to be made that it could usefully be modernized. But the question is, how do you modernize it and for what purpose? If it's to bring it more in line with the global economy and ways to improve all three economies and make them more competitive, I think that that's a good thing. If it's a way to stigmatize one country or another or focus on one statistic over another, for example, a trade deficit, which is not, it's an overly simplistic simplification of what's really going on, then I think that's going to lead to policies that would ultimately be self-defeating. And as the countries move away from each other economically, it's going to hurt all three of us. We'll all be less competitive in the global economy. And I think that's just basic economic reality. So we have to be really careful here. If we're going to update it and modernize it, I think that's probably appropriate. But if it's seen as a way to point fingers or stigmatize or frankly make one country more competitive versus the others, I just don't think that's a possibility in the current environment. So we have to be really careful here.
Ms. Magowan, I think one of the crucial issues before you answer the question is this region is already so integrated with one another. Three countries, Canada, United States, Mexico. So when the chess has to be moved in the right way, otherwise it's going to be disaster for everyone. So, Ms. Magowan, any good idea? Briefly from you, ma'am.
Yes, I think it's important to renegotiate NAFTA. That doesn't mean that we are going to tear apart NAFTA, but instead to adapt to the new economic and political conditions. I think it's important that the three partners are happy with the agreement. That's extremely important, that the workers in these three countries are having a win-win situation. And I think we can accomplish that goal.
Without specifics, but Ms. Carlsen, final word from you.
Renegotiating NAFTA is on the table. There's a great fear in Mexico that when Donald Trump talks about renegotiating NAFTA, it's going to be a strong-armed process in which his particular interests will reign. In that context, there are now many people within Mexico who are saying, if it's going to be that type of a renegotiation, we should just withdraw. In fact, the demand to withdraw from NAFTA among the food sector and the agricultural sector has existed since the beginning, and the peasant organizations now are again reiterating that demand. There's a lot of changes that need to be made because, ironically, with all the talk about the United States winning NAFTA, there have been many negative effects here in Mexico. So there's talk about both withdrawing and renegotiating, but the biggest thing is that it not be a one-sided process.